Hey y'all, this is Marley K. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Sabbath and Sunday worship because this issue is getting ready to come up uh, probably as soon as they flip the switch and collapse the economy because they need a crisis in order to usher in all this new stuff that we're going to be required to do, which is why I'm pumping out all this stuff that I can because I don't know how long the internet is going to be up and I don't know how long we're going to be able to communicate this stuff with you. So, anyway, I want to talk about why we worship on Sunday here in America. The majority of Christian churches and just churches in general, evangelical, whatever, worship on Sunday instead of keeping the Sabbath. And it goes back to Rome. Although all roads always are going to lead back to Rome, and we have to understand that. So let me read you some scriptures about Sabbath, and then I'll get into this article. So this is the NIV version, the Sabbath. Then the Lord said to Moses, I'm sorry, this is Exodus 31:12 through 14. So then the Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, you must observe my Sabbaths. This will be a sign between me and you for the generations to come, so you may know that I am the Lord who makes you holy. And me and Watchman Nehemiah were talking about how this also seals you. When you observe the Sabbath, the Most High knows who his people are. So when you observe Sabbath, or Sunday is not Sabbath. So when you go to church on Sunday, you're not observing Sabbath. You are doing sun worship, and you are doing what Rome told you to do, and Rome is your God. So that's how we are sealed, and that is the sign that the Most High is going to be looking for to determine who's his and who he needs to collect and who he needs to leave here on earth with their pappy. Observe Sabbath because it is holy to you. Anyone who desecrates it is to be put to death, and those who do any work on that day must be cut off from their people. So we don't even observe Sabbath right because the people who put this country together basically just made us a big old plantation where we work 24 hours, 7 days a week. We don't have any rest anymore. So this is Exodus 29 through 11. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. So we observe the Sabbath because it's the day of rest. The Lord told us to do it. The Most High, Yah, he told us to rest on the seventh day, and that's what we're supposed to be doing. So I'm going to go to this story. I'm sorry, not this story, but this article on Catholic.com. But it's very interesting, but it highlighted the history of how we went from observing Sabbath on Saturday to sun worship on Sunday. This article was written in 1999, so it's fairly old, but it was really some good information, fairly accurate, and with some personal bias in it, but it's okay. I got what I needed from it. So you do the same thing. Take the meat, spit out of the bones. When did the church begin to worship on Sunday instead of Saturday, the Hebrew Sabbath? On this question hinges the conclusion to many arguments with fundamentalists, especially Sabbatarians, which this writer calls the Seventh-day Adventists, are the best known, who owe their raison d'etre to the conviction that the early church apostatized when it abandoned observance of the traditional Sabbath. Let's answer this charge by taking a look at the facts about the Sabbath in the Old and New Testament. So I'm not going to go through all of this, but I'm going to read some of it. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth, Genesis 1:1. That's God's creation was perfect is implied by the fact that on the seventh day he rested. He had accomplished everything in the way he desired. The Jewish, and I'm not going to say Jewish, the Israelite concept that the number seven is the perfect number has developed from the creation story as well as from the Sabbath. The 7 is the perfect number, is reinforced by the septenary structure in the text of Genesis. Hebrew Genesis 1:1 has 7 words and the second verse has 14. 3 nouns, God, heaven, and earth, occur in the first verse and are repeated in the story in the numbers divisible by 7. God 35 times, earth 21 times, and heavens 21 times. It is particularly significant that the seventh and last section, Genesis 2 through 3, which deals with the seventh day, has in Hebrew 3 consecutive sentences, 3 for emphasis, each of which consists of 7 words and contains in the middle the expression the seventh day. Sabbatarians, those who worship on Saturday, argue that God's rest on the seventh day, since God obviously did not need rest, was setting an example for man. But the word Sabbath is not found in Genesis and nothing is said about Adam and Eve resting. Moreover, in Eden, God provided everything needed for happiness of Adam and Eve, and there was no work for them to do. Work entered into the world only as a part of the curse of sin. Because you have eaten from the tree, by the sweat of your face you shall eat bread. And that's Genesis 3:17 through 19. Prior to their sin, Adam and Eve were in God's perpetual rest and fellowship. Observance of a Sabbath would have been superfluous. A more likely reason behind God's seventh day of rest may be seen in a recurring theme in the creation story. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. This pattern is repeated for the first 6 days, but missing on the seventh day, suggesting that God's rest was not to establish 1 day per week of rest, but to institute a time of perpetual rest and open fellowship with himself. In sanctifying the seventh day, Genesis 2:3, God sanctified his creation. He had made the perfect world and blessed it. When then was Sabbath instituted? For this we must go to Exodus 16:23 through 24. Moses told the Israelites, "That is what the Lord prescribed. Tomorrow is a day of complete rest, the Sabbath, sacred to the Lord. You may either bake or boil the manna as you please, but whatever is left, put away and keep for the morrow." Thus, first mention of Sabbath is in connection with the manna. The Sabbath law is restated in the 10 Commandments. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work. For in 6 days the Lord had made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. In Genesis, God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. In Exodus, God blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. This verse of Exodus has been used to suggest that the Sabbath was instituted at the time of creation. But if God's rest on the seventh day is viewed as the beginning of time of perpetual rest and fellowship with man, this Exodus passage can be seen as ironical. The Sabbath was but an infinitesimal reminder of what man would have enjoyed had Adam not sinned. There was a list of activities that were forbidden on the Sabbath. Do not go out of your place. Do not bake or boil. Do not do any work. Do not build a fire. Do not carry a load. Do not buy or sell. And do not do your own pleasure. Rather, on Sabbath, one should keep the day holy, observe or celebrate the day, and delight in the Lord. The Sabbath laws given to the Israelites told them to behave very much as Adam and Eve behaved in Eden. It is also interesting to consider that nearly all the prohibitions given in connection with the Sabbath would have been meaningless to Adam and Eve on the first day before sin entered the world. Sabbath in the New Testament. Though the Gospels report that Jesus observed the Sabbath, there are several incidents where he is accused of violating Sabbath law. I'm not going to even get into that because it's just a lot. If you want to read it, it's under the Sabbath in the New Testament. So Sabbatarians argue that the Lord observed the Sabbath and we should imitate Christ in this. And that's what I believe. I don't believe we should add or take away anything. The reasoning, however, fails to consider that our Lord was still under the old covenant when he observed the Sabbath. Indeed, Christ perfectly observed the Sabbath as he did all of the old covenant. However, after he enunciated a new covenant at the Last Supper, his emphasis seems to be on Sundays. Now, see how this right here is where people be doing stuff. Sunday was the day he was found to have been resurrected, and his first two appearances to the 12 disciples were on the following two Sundays. Again, 5 weeks later on Sunday, the Holy Spirit descended on the apostles. So I will have to bring Watchman Nehemiah in to talk about this particular section. I don't think this is correct, but I will see if I can get him to come back and we can clarify this because I don't want to leave this unaddressed. So here it says, throughout the book of Acts, Luke reports mass conversions of the Jews in Jerusalem and notes that many were devout Jews and priests who remained zealous for the law. There is no suggestion in the New Testament that these devout Christianized Jews gave up Sabbath worship. The church in Asia, with Paul as its teacher, was confronted by Jewish Christians who insisted that new Christians be circumcised as Old Testament law commanded. The disciples met in Jerusalem in the year 49 to resolve this matter. At the Council of Jerusalem, Peter, James, and the other apostles set aside the law of circumcision, a law that was a sign of God's covenantal relationship with the chosen people and which was an everlasting pact. While there was much debate in Jerusalem on whether or not Gentile Christians should be exempted from circumcision, the council was silent on the matter of Sabbath worship. This suggests that Sabbath versus Sunday worship was not an issue at the time. So when they talk about this circumcision issue, notice they didn't mention the word Gentile in the beginning. So they talk about Peter, James, and the other apostles set aside the law of circumcision, a law that was a sign of God's conventional relationship with the chosen people. So even if people are Gentiles, once they're Gentiles, they are also supposed to fall under the law. So it shouldn't have been a question, but they probably were getting smoke from these folks, and so they probably felt pressure. I'm not sure. I was living through that time. I'm not going to make any assumptions, but it's just interesting that they have this discussion and it is surrounding Gentile Christians. So that explains a lot of why again you have these different groups, one who's trying to stay true to what the word said and is explicitly said don't desecrate it or I'm gonna kill you, and people desecrate it anyway. Let's see. While there was a debate in Jerusalem on whether or not Gentile Christians should be exempted from circumcision, the council was silent on the matter of Sabbath. So I already read that. Around the year 60, circumstantial evidence suggests that the Roman Church began to worship on Sunday. For instance, in the year 50, the Christian church in Rome was considered to be a sect of Judaism. Notice the connection. 14 years later, these same Christians were clearly understood to be distinct from Jews, which would be the actual Israelites. Nero blamed Christians for the fires in Rome in 64. That such a sharp change could occur in this short span of time suggests that there was a significant external difference in the practices of the two faiths. The change of the Christian worship from Sabbath to Sunday would certainly have allowed for this distinction. The Council of Jerusalem's decision on circumcision may have changed the way the early church viewed Sabbath as well. One can almost hear the discussions. I'm not getting into that. The discussions. Thus, Jewish Christians similarly would have questioned how many of the Old Covenant Sabbath regulations applied under the New Covenant. And notice they say Jewish Christians and Christian. Anytime you hear Christian, it's not actually like, people, the Hebrews, people who are actually practicing the law, statutes, and commandments the way that the Bible told us that we should, or that the way the law was written, and the way that Moses received it and interpreted it for his people. Thus, in the era following the Jerusalem Council, it seems inconceivable that the apostles were not asked about the observance of Sabbath. So, this whole section is kind of like somebody making implications or putting their 2 cents in. If you weren't there, you don't know. But, to me, this is an assumption. And then it goes into the New Testament and so on and so forth. So I'm not going to read this part. Because I really want to talk about just how things changed. So it says, from the text, it seems clear that Paul considers Sabbath observance a matter of personal conviction that was not important in itself. I don't believe that. Moreover, since Paul was presumably responding to the churches in Colossae, Galatia, and Rome about matters which concerned them, it seems clear that some Christians were worshiping on days other than Sabbath in Rome and in Asia Minor around 54 through 58. Around the years 80 through 90, Christians were thrown out of synagogues. This may have provided further stimulus for Christians to change their worship from Sabbath to Sunday. The Apostle John wrote his gospel in the same time frame, significant because it provided for Christians an explanation of how God could change an everlasting law. John wrote how the world had been symbolically created anew in Jesus. One implication of this is that with the passion, death, and resurrection of Christ, one eternity had ended and another had begun. God could therefore abrogate an everlasting law and still not contradict himself. But God doesn't contradict himself. So that doesn't make any sense. But my point is, to this, take away the meat, eat the meat and spit out the bones. You see, when the Christian church went to worshiping on Sunday instead of Sabbath, Rome decided that they were going to do something different. And the people in that era did something different for whatever reason, but they did not keep the Sabbath with the Hebrews, or what they call here Jews. But the Sabbath in the post-apostolic age. Post-apostolic age. Forgive me. In Syria, following the death of the last apostle, a guide for the teaching of Christians was written called The Doctrine of the Apostles. Its use was reported by church historians, but the document itself was lost for centuries. It was found around 1900 in a manuscript dating back to the year 1000. It says, on the Lord's own day, gather together and break bread. This is a clear reference invoking Christians to worship on Sunday, written around the year 100. So this is what I want to harp on, because it shares how the Christian church today still holds true to the laws that Rome created regarding worship and worshiping God. But you're really not worshiping God, because he didn't tell you to worship on Sunday. He said worship on the seventh day, Sabbath. And he had his own rules and laws and statutes on how to do that. And so the time is coming where we're going to have to decide whether or not, if you believe in heaven and hell, if you believe in the Most High, if you believe in his son, the Messiah, if you believe in the end times and tribulation and the time of Jacob's trouble and the 7 years and the plagues and all the things that are coming upon the earth is going to be destroyed by fire. If you believe in all of that, but you go to church on Sunday, you need to understand that you're going to church on Sunday because Rome told you to do that. And Rome tells you to do everything that God says don't do. It's like if God said go left, they tell you to go right. God says worship on Sabbath on Saturday, they say do it on Sunday. If God said rest, they say work. They'll make the world work so that you can't observe Sabbath on the right day. So, or they'll erase your history so that you don't know, what's right and what's wrong. So, blue laws are getting ready to come back up, especially in southern states. And if you live in the South, you live in any one of the original 13 colonies that are now 13 states, slave states, states that benefited from the transatlantic slave trade, below the Mason-Dixon line, let's say that. Understand that this is getting ready to come back up. They're already making it plain with these fights about the 10 Commandments and needing to have the Bible back in school, and blurring the lines between church and state. There have been a lot of op-eds written about national Sunday law. Let me see. And today is Earth Day, so let me see if I can find anything about Sunday law. They may not call them Sunday law. They may say it's blue law. Let's see. News. So we are one church on National Day of Prayer. That was 7 hours ago, 32 days ago. Weirdest laws passed in every state. Lawmakers still searching for a compromise on Washington's end of drugs. So, so they don't have anything here about Sunday laws. So let me see if I type in blue laws. There are some things happening, but it's really hard. The search engines are hiding it. So let me try Eco Sabbath. I don't see anything. Okay, so here is a really good story, and it's timely, but this is why I'm talking about the blue laws coming up, because the Supreme Court is getting ready to hear cases about Sabbath. And so it's important because the Sabbath, according to this lawsuit that is going up to the Supreme Court, calls Sunday worship Sabbath, and Sunday worship is not Sabbath. They're two different things. So because you are not aware of the history of Sabbath and how we came to worship on Sunday, people are going to be really confused when this, cases is heard, and the decision is made. However it goes, now it is established that Sunday is Sabbath. So let me read this case to you right quick. The U.S. Supreme Court on Tuesday, April 18th, began considering the legal definition of what constitutes undue hardship as the court heard the case of Groff versus DeJoy. The case involves Gerald Groff, an evangelical Christian mailman who lost his job for refusing to work on Sunday, the day he observes as his Sabbath. Groff then sued USPS, which is the Postal Service, for failing to accommodate his sincerely held religious beliefs. However, he was unsuccessful as both the District Court and the Third Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against him on the basis that his absence on Sunday caused an undue hardship to the USPS. So his absence caused hardship. It doesn't have anything to do with his religious freedom. And notice that they allow the line to be blurred, or that they basically changed the definition of Sabbath here. So now Sunday worship is called Sabbath. And God did not tell us, or the Most High did not tell us to worship Him or rest on Sunday. Sunday is not a holy day. The Sabbath is a holy day. The Sabbath is Saturday, not Sunday. So the reason I want to talk to you about this is because they blurred the lines. If you read this article and you do your own research and you see how we came to Sunday worship and what's the difference between Sabbath and Sunday, and then you look at this court case that's being heard right now, they're getting ready to blur the lines, and they need to get Sabbath back in our mouths because it is going to come up during this climate agenda, this eco Sabbath that's coming up. And they're going to tell us your day of rest is on the Sabbath and the Sabbath is on Sunday, when the Bible specifically says that's not true. And when the Israelites observed a totally different way and Rome changed it. So with that said, I want y'all to be aware of what's going on. I'm going to bring you part 2 of this discussion because it's going to show you how politics is going to play a role in this. And then after that, I will have Watchman Nehemiah, if I can get a hold of him, I will have him come back and discuss this article, the pieces that are confusing in regards to history and some of the commentary that the writer made. So, study up on Sabbath and Sunday worship. Understand the difference. Understand they are not the same. And if you are going to a Bible believing church and you worship on Sunday instead of the Sabbath, and you say you worshiping God or Yah and Most High, you need to come out of the Christian church because it's teaching you wrong. It's going to lead you to the wrong place. Again, I will have Watchman Nehemiah to come on and talk to you about that because I don't feel like I'm capable of talking to you about that. I just want to talk to you about Sunday law. The blue laws that are getting ready to be put back on the books, come back to life, and then we're all going to have to make that decision of whether we're going to keep Sabbath or whether or not we're going to observe Sunday laws. So I know this is a long discussion. I'm very sorry I went through it kind of fast, but I just don't know how else to get it done. So if you have any questions, please leave the questions in the comments and I will try to answer them. If I can't answer them, I will get Watchman Nehemiah to come through and answer them for us. And look out for the second video, the part 2 of this. Please like this video, share it, subscribe to the channel. Please try to come out of these churches and wake and shake people up to get them to come out too, because Sunday worship is going to cause people to get the mark of the beast. And that is not what we want. We want to save as many people as we can, just like the Most High does. All right, y'all. This is Marley K, and I am out. Hey,